The impetus for this research study began as I was choosing a place to do my DMA, my Doctor of Musical Arts, which is in organ performance. When I discovered that Roberta Gary is a licensed Andover educator and uses body mapping in her lessons with her students and in master classes, it was an easy decision for me. There were things in my own playing that I wanted to work on that involved issues with my body, and I felt that being more at ease with my body on the bench would bring out more musicianship, but also make me feel better as a player, and that certainly has happened. In my first year, I asked if I could work with her privately in addition to private lessons, but to do independent study with her. We called this movement at the organ. Those 2 quarters, when we worked on that together, although I was mostly self-directed, she certainly guided me in the materials to study, and I continually had additional lessons with her, as well as a Feldenkrais practitioner, Cynthia Allen, who I ended up including in this research study. And throughout those 6 months, learned a great deal. The research that I did for myself, those 6 months, became the nucleus of this study. And you can see my bibliography online and see some of the resources that I used in that original study for myself and that I expanded and continued to use throughout this project. The research study itself was conducted in 3 places. First, at Christ Church Cathedral, Louisville, Kentucky, where I am the cathedral musician. The second one at Susquehanna University. And the last one at the College Conservatory of Music in Cincinnati. 13 students altogether participated, and with a wide variety of experience. Some had no experience in somatic education or movement. Some had quite a bit. There were people who don't have degrees in organ but have a tremendous experience in playing organ, to undergraduate organ majors. There were undergraduate music education majors in other instruments, and doctoral students in organ. There was really a cross-section of musicians, which was the goal I had hoped for. So I was really pleased with the response and had wished more people could have participated, but there was simply not time. What we saw through these 3 classes is that there was an instant change. The students came and played first a hymn and a piece of their own choosing. I chose the hymn, so all the people in the class would play the same hymn, and then they chose their piece. Then we had about 45 or 50 minutes of 5 different exercises. Feldenkrais called them processes, and I'm going to explain those in just a moment. And then they took a break and came back and played the same hymn and the piece again, and remarked on any changes that they noticed in themselves. I also asked the people listening and witnessing to respond, and oftentimes the people listening and watching had greater insights about the person who had just played than the student. That often is the case because sometimes for something that's new, it takes some time to integrate it. Some people did notice a big difference and commented on that, and I'm including some of their responses in the video to come. What was most telling was the questionnaire, which followed 3 days after, and I asked everyone to fill out some basic questions and note differences that they noticed in their bodies. Some were minor, some were quite significant. A couple of people, when they played the second time, actually sort of fell apart on the bench. And while they initially were upset about it, I said, well, okay, let's talk about what happened. And all of them were struggling with the new information in their bodies. This is not uncommon. I've experienced it. And it's a good thing because then you know that something's happening and that the body is having to regroup in a way and that you need to give it time. So if you are watching this and you begin to experiment with some of the things you see, or you go to a teacher and the next day you feel your playing is not the same, or you feel that it might not be as good, actually step back and look at it, because it could be that your body is just trying to reorganize and understand the information. And you'll see that in the last lesson on my video where I take a lesson with Cynthia Allen. I had to stop, slow down, and let everything that she had just done integrate into my body. But I had to take it down in tempo. I had to be more calm and easy with my body. Even after all of these years of working with it, with that much new information, it was significant for me. So the students first come and played for me and for each other a hymn that I chose, and then an organ piece of their own choosing. Everyone played in front of everyone, and then we had 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how many people were participating, of this research study. The first part of the study was a Zen saying. As you've seen throughout the video, I've incorporated Zens that Dr. Gary has used or that I have found. Some of them are not from Zen. They're from quotes from famous people, some quotes from people we've never heard of. They're just sayings that bring us into the now. So I ask everyone to reflect on that. Then the next thing we did was a focus exercise from The Now Habit by Neil Fiore. This is one of the books that Dr. Gary uses with students who need a little help in organizing their time, and there is a wonderful focus exercise in there for allowing your mind to be quiet and focusing in on the task at hand. The third element was from Bones for Life, based out of the Feldenkrais method, and this is called Bouncing on Heels. This feels really good. It just sort of connects our body, creates energy, and when done properly is sort of, as my teacher Cynthia Allen called it, sort of the bread and butter, the beginning of the Bones for Life method. Pom pom, pom pom, pom pom, pom pom, pom pom, pom pom, pom pom. It's called Bouncing on Heels. The next part of the research study was mapping the rockers. So these are the bones that we sit on, and I felt that of all of the hours of the 6-hour body mapping course, mapping the rockers for organists is very important, because you end up not really only mapping those isolated rockers, but how you sit. So we began to think just about the rockers themselves, and bringing yourself into sitting, standing, and then back to sitting. So it really was an exploration of that whole area: pelvic floor, upper leg, how do we move? And without them knowing it, we had to talk about the points of balance. Because if you don't talk about your head placement on top of the spine, it's really hard to know how to stand up as well. So it really was the top and the bottom of the spine that you deal with in the rockers. Also important for organists, of course, is the arm structure. So we began mapping the arm structure as the 5th segment of the study, and realizing that the clavicle and the shoulder blade are all a part of the arm. And how can you move your arm from a position down to up to the keyboard? So we discovered various ways. of how to do that. And I changed one approach to bringing your hand up in the very first class, which was here at Christ Church Cathedral. I had students bringing their arms up this way, and then I began to see what was happening in alignment. So one lesson from Feldenkrais is to bring your hands up to the center and then out. So we began to explore that. I think that was the most interesting in a way, because we use our arms every day. We don't think about it, and organists use their arms and hands and take it for granted that the movement is easy, but it actually can be easier than it often is.
And then the arm that you've not worked on yet, bring that into the picture. Just come up through center, come to your imaginary keyboard. And the first move in and out. And this is an exaggerated movement, because we don't need that much movement, but try movement of moving forward and back. Notice the difference in, this is both hands working now. Notice the difference between the right and left side. What feels different about the side that you've improved. Now, move left to right, in and out. Go both one way, go the other way.
And then the last one was the clock face, which comes from the Feldenkrais method. And that is where you imagine that you're just sitting on a clock, and that to your left is 9, to your right is 3, in front of you is 12, and 6 is behind you. And so this also completes the rocker mapping from the fourth step in the research project, or the research study, so that we're putting in good use or applying the concept of the mapping to music, so that we imagine that if we were playing something, where would we go? Would we need to go to 3, and then what happens to your left leg? If we go to 9, what happens over here? So we explored all of those, and then we went all the way around the clock face, and then I invited the students to do their own exploration. And then we took a break, and because that was about an hour to an hour and 20 minutes total from the time we started, with everyone playing. And then everyone played again. Before I did the research study itself with the 3 classes of students, I began the project with an in-depth interview with my professor, Roberta Gary, and then we had a lesson at the organ where she applied the principles that I had been studying. I would say that the core of my research comes out of that 1-hour interview with her, as she goes into depth of how she has used somatic education and lifelong learning, which is something she is a huge proponent for. So I was very pleased to be able to interview her and have the lesson with her, because I believe that those 2 hours of time demonstrate fully my point that somatic education improves our bodies, it improves our playing, and it improves our lives. The subsequent interview with Cynthia Allen and the lesson that we have is similar in that we go into great depth into her own study of somatic education. And though she's not a musician, she shows incredible insight into working with musicians, but in a very different way than Roberta Gary. So I hope as you watch those 2 interviews, you will notice that the goal is the same, creating ease at the keyboard and greater awareness of your body and playing. And though Cynthia is not a musician, she was able to say, that sounded more free, more fluid. And those are important things to keep in mind, because sometimes it's good to play for non-musicians and get responses as well as peers or other teachers. The fascinating element of working with Cynthia was that in the lesson, much of everything she did was away from the keyboard. That is the technique that I applied to working with the students in my research study. As Feldenkrais works with people away from the keyboard, away from their computers, not in the car, and that's detailed more in the interview I had with Cynthia, I worked with students just with them sitting in a chair, sometimes standing or sitting. As we mapped various places in the body, I had them stand and discover their rockers and the hip joints and how they stand and move a little better. But for the most part, they're seated and they pretend to play at the keyboard, having their hands in the air, imagining how it would feel. And I think this is a valuable experience, having done this for now several years as a student of Feldenkrais, working away from the instrument. It's very helpful. First of all, it takes us away from the notes and the rhythms, and the practical application of that focuses on our body. Just like when I work with my choir at the cathedral, when we're working on breathing and mapping the breathing structures of the body, we do that as a warm-up or as a separate part of the rehearsal and not in the middle of a piece, so that you can really focus on the intercostals and the ribs and how everything connects. The same thing is true working at the organ. Sometimes we need to step off the organ, sit on the piano bench, and map our rockers instead of always being in the same place. Ultimately, you are going to come back to the organ, and that's what Cynthia demonstrated so well. And for the little bit of time she did work with me at the organ, it was incredibly helpful. Not any more so than working away, but in a different way. One of the questions asked in the DMA project guidelines at CCM for the doctoral student doing the project is, was this a successful project? And as I reflected upon that in how I might relay that to my committee and to those who participated in it, I have to say a resounding yes. First of all, I want to say that for me, as the principal investigator and the writer of this document and the producer of the project, I learned a tremendous amount as I guided people in mapping and created this 45-minute exercise for them. You have to know it so well yourself in order to teach it, and then even as you are teaching it, you learn what works and what doesn't. In the very first study at the cathedral with the first four students, I realized as the students were bringing their arms up this way to the keyboard, I saw all sorts of things happening in shoulders and neck that concerned me a little bit. So a Feldenkrais lesson that I had not planned to incorporate, but I began to in that first one, is to bring the hands up through the center of the body and come to the keyboard this way. It changes how we use our shoulders, and it also helps our neck stay in a better alignment. So as we began to explore that, I began to see people sitting more free, sitting easier on the rockers, and having better neck alignment. So I automatically incorporated that into the other two studies as well. So I think that in and of itself is successful, as my own teaching of these concepts will continue. Being able to adapt to what is happening with the people with whom I'm working is very important. If you go online where you're seeing this video and you can see the research study results, you'll see that everyone responded positively to most every question in the follow-up questionnaire. Everyone felt more relaxed. It's a general term, but I think it's a good term for folks who don't have a lot of somatic education because we do feel relaxed. Then more detailed explanations followed in their written comments when I asked them just to reflect on what that meant for them. Some people had general things, simply saying it felt more free in their arms. Some people went on to comment that the next day as they were conducting their choir, their neck and face felt more relaxed. Some people commented even a week or two later via email to me that they had continued to notice changes. One person in particular in Cincinnati said that she felt her ability to overcome some of her performance anxiety was improved, being able to connect more physically to the instrument and not have to continually block out the messages that came from her anxiety internally. So all of these go to prove that this study was successful, and that for anyone who's interested in improving their playing and having greater ease at their instrument, that the concepts of somatic education are very valuable. Any observations you had about your playing?
I get really nervous when I play, and so one of the things that I noticed the first time is the first time I played through it, I didn't feel like I was actually here. And I think I try sometimes in an effort to block out nerves, I try to block out any physical sensations. So to then bring physical sensation back and to be thinking about where I'm in contact with the bench, where I'm in contact with the keyboard, is frightening, but at the same time I think allows me, I felt like I was more ready to kind of recover from mistakes that happened